The Veltai Empire had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for over 3,000 years. Their massive war fleets moved like deadly shadows across 47 star systems, bringing terror wherever they went. They didn't just conquer worlds, they broke spirits, crushed hope, and turned entire civilizations into trembling servants who obeyed out of pure fear. Admiral Kesevar stood tall on the command bridge of his flagship, the Dark Talon. The massive vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers long, its black hull bristling with plasma cannons and ion torpedoes. Through the reinforced viewing ports, he watched the beautiful blue-green world of Terra Nova spinning slowly in the void of space. White clouds swirled over vast oceans, and he could see the brown patches of farmland covering the main continent. "Status report," Kesevar commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. His species, the Veltai, were tall and thin with gray skin that looked like ancient stone. Their eyes glowed with a cold blue light, and when they spoke, their voices carried the weight of countless conquered worlds. "Another human colony, Admiral," reported his aide, a younger Veltai named Thexmar, who operated the scanning equipment. "Population reads at exactly 2 million beings. Primary industry appears to be agriculture. They grow food crops across 60% of the landmass. Military defenses are practically non-existent. A few outdated patrol ships, some ground-based shield generators, nothing that could threaten our forces." Kesevar nodded slowly, his glowing eyes never leaving the planet below. The pattern was always the same, had been the same for thousands of years across hundreds of worlds. The Veltai war machine would arrive with overwhelming force, dozens of battleships, thousands of fighter craft, enough firepower to turn an entire world into molten rock. Then they would select their target carefully, someone whose death would shatter the population's will to resist. The execution would be broadcast across the entire star system, sometimes to neighboring systems as well. Most alien species surrendered within hours of witnessing Veltai brutality. The Zephyrians had lasted only 3 hours after watching their planetary leader die. The crystalline Vorticae had surrendered in mere minutes when the Veltai destroyed their sacred breeding grounds. Even the warrior-like Thexians, famous throughout the galaxy for their fighting spirit, had laid down their weapons after seeing what the Veltai did to captured prisoners. But humans were proving to be different, and that difference troubled Kesevar more than he cared to admit. 3 months ago, the Veltai had attacked the human mining station at Kepler 442. It was a small outpost, barely 5,000 people working the asteroid belts for rare minerals. Kesevar had ordered the complete destruction of the facility. Every habitat module vaporized, every ship turned to scrap metal floating in space. He expected the usual response from the human colonies: fear, surrender, tribute payments to avoid a similar fate. Instead, the humans had done something that no other species in the galaxy had ever done. They held memorial services, not just quiet, private ceremonies, but massive public gatherings broadcast across their entire communications network. They spoke the names of every single person who had died at Kepler 442. All 5,237 names read aloud by volunteers who took turns at podiums on dozens of worlds. Then they carved those names into stone monuments, permanent markers that would last for centuries, ensuring that future generations would remember exactly who had died and how. They refused to let the memory fade, refused to let fear erase the identity of their dead. "Admiral," Thexmar said, pulling Kesevar from his thoughts, "the fleet is in position. All 36 vessels report ready for orbital deployment." Around the Dark Talon, the Veltai Armada hung in space like a constellation of death, battleships with names like Soul Crusher and Hope's End powered. Their weapons systems. Smaller cruisers launched squadrons of fighter craft that moved in perfect formation, their pilots trained from birth to show no mercy. In the cargo bays of the transport ships, thousands of Veltai ground troops checked their armor and weapons, preparing for another easy conquest. "Prepare the landing craft," Kesevar ordered, his voice carrying the authority of 3 millennia of successful campaigns. "These humans need to learn what happens to those who refuse to forget. They think remembering their dead makes them strong. We'll show them it only makes the pain last longer." Far below on Terra Nova, In the agricultural fields outside New Seoul Colony, 8-year-old Minji ran through the tall grain stalks, her laughter echoing across the peaceful farmland. She chased colorful butterflies that danced between the golden wheat, their wings catching the warm sunlight. Her small hands reached out as she tried to catch them, but they always fluttered just beyond her grasp. Her father Jinho worked nearby, operating one of the massive harvesting machines that moved slowly through the crops. The machine's mechanical. Arms cut and gathered the grain with practiced efficiency, while Jinho monitored the controls from his cabin. Sweat beaded on his forehead in the afternoon heat, but he smiled every time he heard his daughter's happy voice, carried on the wind. 20 kilometers away in New Seoul's education center, Minji's mother Sumin stood before a classroom of 30 young students, teaching them about the history of human space exploration. Her voice was gentle but enthusiastic, as she told them about the brave pioneers who had first left Earth, about the struggles and triumphs of building new homes among the stars. The family lived simple, honest lives, growing food to feed their community, and raising their daughter with love and hope for the future. They had heard the news reports about trouble in distant star systems, about an alien empire that demanded tribute from human colonies, but such things seemed impossibly far away from their quiet world of farms and schools and children playing in golden fields. None of them knew that high above their world, death waited in the cold void of space, and that their peaceful existence was about to be shattered forever. The morning sky over Terra Nova turned black as death itself. Hundreds of Veltai dropships descended through the atmosphere like a swarm of mechanical locusts, their engines screaming as they cut through the peaceful blue sky. Each ship was the size of a building, dark metal crafts shaped like giant teardrops with glowing red engines that left trails of fire in their wake. Jinho was still operating his harvesting machine when the first ships appeared on the horizon. The massive agricultural equipment suddenly seemed tiny compared to the alien vessels that blocked out the sun. His hands froze on the controls as he watched the invasion force spread across the sky like spilled ink. "Minji!" he shouted, jumping down from his machine and running toward the grain fields where his daughter had been playing. "Minji, come here now." The little girl emerged from between the tall stalks, her eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. She had never seen spacecraft before, and to her 8-year-old mind they looked like something from the adventure stories her mother read to her at bedtime. "Papa, are those visitors from space?" she asked, taking his outstretched hand. Before Jinho could answer, the Veltai soldiers began their assault. Dozens of small fighter craft broke away from the main formation, swooping low over the farmland. These weren't here to destroy buildings or crops, they were hunting people. Energy nets shot out from the fighters, crackling webs of blue electricity that wrapped around any humans they found and dragged them from their hiding places. At the New Seoul Education Center, Sumin was trying to keep her students calm when the alien soldiers smashed through the classroom walls. The Veltai ground troops stood nearly 8 feet tall in their powered armor, mechanical suits that made them look like walking machines of war. Their helmets had glowing red visors that scanned the terrified children, and their voices came out as electronic growls through built-in speakers. "All humans will report to the Central Plaza immediately," one soldier announced, his weapon trained on the cowering students. "Resistance will result in immediate termination." Sumin gathered her students around her, whispering words of comfort even as her own heart pounded with terror. She had to be strong for them, had to help them through whatever nightmare was about to unfold. Across New Seoul Colony, the same scene played out in every building, every home, every workplace. The Veltai soldiers moved with mechanical precision, their advanced technology making resistance impossible. Force fields blocked escape routes, while floating scanner drones hunted down anyone who tried to hide. Within 2 hours, they had gathered every single colonist in the Central Plaza. The plaza had once been a place of celebration, where the community held festivals and children played games. Now it became a prison under the open sky, surrounded by hovering Veltai gunships and patrolled by armed soldiers. 2 million people stood packed together, parents holding their children close while elderly couples clutched each other's hands. Admiral Kesevar's flagship descended through the clouds, a massive dreadnought that blotted out the sun as it took position directly above the plaza. Speaker systems mounted on assault craft crackled to life, and his cold voice echoed across the terrified crowd. "People of Terra Nova, you will witness the price of defiance. Your species has shown disrespect to the Veltai Empire by refusing to forget your dead. Today you will learn why forgetting is a mercy we grant to the conquered." The Veltai soldiers began separating families with ruthless efficiency. Their scanners analyzed each person, measuring heart rates, stress levels, and emotional responses. They were looking for something specific, and their alien minds calculated with machine-like precision. Minji clung to her parents as the soldiers approached their section of the crowd. The little girl pressed her face against her mother's dress, trying to hide from the frightening aliens in their mechanical armor. But the Veltai scanners had already identified what they were looking for. When their glowing red visors focused on Minji, Jinho immediately understood. He stepped forward, placing himself between his daughter and the alien soldiers. "Please take me instead," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "She's just a child. I'm the one who works the farms, who contributes to the colony." "Take me." The nearest soldier tilted its armored head, and Admiral Kesevar's voice spoke through its helmet speakers. "That is precisely why she was chosen, human. Your species' attachment to your young is a weakness we will exploit. You value innocence above logic, emotion above survival. This makes you controllable," Su Min screamed as the soldiers reached for her daughter, but energy restraints held her back. All around the plaza, other parents began crying out in horror as they realized what was about to happen. The Veltai had chosen the most innocent among them, the one whose death would break their spirits completely. "Please," Jinho begged, falling to his knees. "I'll do anything. We'll surrender completely, just don't hurt her." "Your surrender was never in question," Kesevar replied coldly. "This is about ensuring you never forget your place in our empire." The execution was broadcast simultaneously across all human space. On 17 worlds, in orbital stations and colony ships, in the government chambers on Earth itself, humans watched in growing horror as an innocent child was chosen to pay the ultimate price for their species' refusal to submit to tyranny. The Veltai expected the familiar pattern: terror, surrender, the complete collapse of resistance that they had seen on hundreds of worlds before. They had perfected this technique over 3,000 years, and it had never failed to break a species' will to fight. But something different happened in the moments that followed. As the terrible deed was done and little Minji's life was taken, before the eyes of the galaxy, the response from humanity was not what the Veltai had expected. There was no immediate surrender, no desperate pleas for mercy. Instead, something far more dangerous began to spread across human space, a silence that grew heavy with promise, a quiet that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. Sumin's scream of anguish echoed across the plaza and through the communication networks to every human world. But it was Jinho's words, spoken in a voice that carried the weight of absolute certainty that would haunt the galaxy forever. "You have no idea what you've just done." In that moment, something fundamental changed in the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The Veltai had made their greatest mistake. They had underestimated what happens when you push a species not to the breaking point, but past it entirely. The silence that followed Minji's death was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. Within 6 hours of the broadcast ending, every human trade vessel in known space simply vanished. Massive cargo ships carrying food supplies to alien worlds disappeared from hyperspace routes without sending distress signals. Passenger liners that had been ferrying diplomats between star systems went completely dark, their communication arrays suddenly offline. On the trading station orbiting Proxima Centauri, alien merchants waited for human cargo ships that never arrived. The Veltai had always relied on human agricultural products and manufactured goods. Their empire was built on conquest, not production. Now their supply lines were evaporating like morning mist. The Galactic Communications Network, which had carried constant chatter between human colonies for over 2 centuries, fell silent. No news broadcasts, no personal messages, no diplomatic transmissions. Even the emergency channels that were supposed to remain open during any crisis had gone dead. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy overnight. But on Earth, in the massive underground chambers beneath Geneva, where the United Earth Council met, the silence was being replaced by something far more dangerous than words. President Kim Hye-jin stood at the central podium, her usually perfect diplomatic composure cracked by tears that she made no effort to hide. Behind her, holographic displays showed the faces of Minji and thousands of other victims from across the galaxy. "They killed Minji thinking it would break us," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of human space through encrypted military channels. "They believed that watching an innocent child die would make us surrender, make us bow down and accept their rule through terror. They were wrong." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across 73 human worlds, the mobilization began within hours. This wasn't the slow, bureaucratic buildup that usually preceded military campaigns. This was something primal, something that came from the deepest part of the human spirit. On New Busan, the Park family gathered around their kitchen table for what they knew might be their last meal together. Min Soo, their eldest son at 25, had already received his military deployment orders. His younger brothers, Junho and Taehyun, barely 18 and 19, had volunteered the moment the recruitment centers opened. "You boys don't have to do this," their mother Kyung whispered. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were meaningless. Her sons' faces carried the same expression she had seen on her own father's face when he talked about the old wars on Earth. A quiet determination that couldn't be argued with or negotiated away. "Yes, we do," Minsu replied simply. "If we don't fight now, if we let them get away with this, then every human child in the galaxy becomes their next target." Similar scenes played out on every human world. The recruitment centers that had been nearly empty the week before were now packed with volunteers. Young people, middle-aged workers, even grandparents who insisted they could still contribute something to the war effort. The Veltai had expected fear. Instead, they had created unity. On Mars Colony, the massive shipyards that usually built civilian cargo vessels were retooling for war production. Seung-hoon, a factory supervisor who had spent 20 years building peaceful merchant ships, now worked 18-hour shifts supervising the construction of destroyers and battle cruisers. His work crews had doubled in size overnight as volunteers poured in from across the solar system. "How many ships can we build?" asked Commander Daeho, the military liaison assigned to coordinate the shipyard's conversion. Seung-hoon wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the production schedules scrolling across his tablet. "At current pace, we can launch 2 destroyers every week, 1 battle cruiser every month. But if you give me more raw materials and another 1,000 workers, I can double that." "You'll have whatever you need," Daeho promised. "Money, materials, manpower. The government has authorized unlimited resources for military production." The transformation wasn't limited to military preparations. In schools across human space, teachers like Young Soo on Europa were changing their lesson plans. Instead of abstract history lessons about distant conflicts, they were teaching their students about the victims of the Veltai Empire, every name, every story, every world that had suffered under alien tyranny. "Today we learn about Minji," Young-soo told his class of 12-year-olds, their young faces serious beyond their years. "But she wasn't the first child the Veltai killed, and if we don't stop them, she won't be the last. Can you tell me the name of the Thexian youngling who died 3 years ago?" "Koreth of the Mountain Clan," several students answered in unison. "And the Zephyrian who was executed for refusing to give up his people's sacred texts, Whisperwind of the Third Harmony." The children were learning that the galaxy was full of innocents who had died at Veltai hands, and that remembering their names was the first step toward making sure they were avenged. Meanwhile, the aliens who had ruled through fear for millennia were discovering that their entire understanding of warfare was obsolete. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Kesevar stared at intelligence reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about conquered species. "Sir, the human fleet movements are unlike anything in our tactical databases," reported Thexmar, his aide's voice tight with worry. "They're not retreating to defensive positions. They're not trying to negotiate. They're advancing." Kesevar studied the holographic display showing human space. Red icons representing military vessels, were moving in coordinated formations toward Veltai territory. But this wasn't random aggression. It was strategic, calculated, and terrifyingly organized. They should be surrendering, he said, more to himself than to his aide. Every psychological profile, every historical precedent indicates that witnessing the execution of their young should have broken their resistance completely. Perhaps the humans are different from other species, Thexmar suggested carefully. All species break, Kesevar replied, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. It's simply a matter of finding the right pressure point. We destroyed their mining station, and they held memorial services. We killed their child, and they prepare for war. High above Luna, Fleet Admiral Li Jiwan stood in the command center of humanity's newest and most powerful warship, the UES Righteous Fury. The massive dreadnought stretched over 3 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with weapons that had been designed not for conquest, but for one specific purpose: breaking the Veltai Empire forever. Around her flagship, the largest military fleet in human history was taking shape. Destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and carrier vessels loaded with fighter craft. But more than the ships themselves, it was the crews that made this fleet different. Every single person aboard these vessels had volunteered, had demanded to be part of humanity's response to Minji's murder. Jiwan looked at the tactical display showing human forces positioning themselves across the galaxy, each battle group moving toward predetermined targets with mechanical precision. Her communication officer waited for orders, his hand hovering over the transmit button that would signal the beginning of humanity's war of justice. "Admiral, all battle groups report ready," he announced, "awaiting your command." Jiwan thought of the little girl who had been chasing butterflies in a field just days ago, whose only crime had been belonging to a species that refused to forget its dead. She thought of every innocent victim whose name was now carved in stone, on memorial walls across human space. "Send the signal to all commands," she said, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's collective rage. "For Minji. For all of them. No mercy." Across human space, the awakening was complete. The Veltai had expected to break humanity's spirit with one terrible act. Instead, they had forged something that the galaxy had never seen before. An entire species united by righteous anger, and an unshakable belief that some crimes could never be forgiven. The war for the galaxy's soul was about to begin. The synchronized attack began at exactly 0800 Galactic Standard Time across 17 different star systems. Human fleets materialized from hyperspace like avenging angels, their ships emerging from the swirling blue portals, with weapons already charging and battle formations perfectly aligned. The timing was so precise that Veltai commanders across the galaxy received distress calls from multiple systems within the same 60-second window. This wasn't conquest as the galaxy understood it. Conquerors came for resources, territory, or strategic advantage. What descended upon the Veltai Empire that day was something far more dangerous. Justice wearing the armor of righteous fury. Captain Park Donghae stood on the bridge of the battleship UES Vengeance, watching as Veltai Prime grew larger on the main display. The alien homeworld was a fortress planet, its surface covered with defensive installations and orbital weapons platforms that had protected the Empire's heart for 3 millennia. Massive space stations ringed the planet like mechanical moons, each one bristling with enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. "All ships, this is Donghae," he broadcast on open frequencies, ensuring that every Veltai in the system could hear his words. "This is for every child, every innocent, every life you took to feed your empire of fear. Today, the galaxy learns that evil has consequences." The human assault was unlike anything the Veltai had ever faced. Their tactical computers, programmed with data from thousands of previous battles, couldn't predict human movements. Traditional warfare followed patterns. Fleets would engage at maximum range, trading volleys of missiles and energy beams while maneuvering for advantage. But the humans fought differently. Human fighter squadrons dove straight through Veltai defensive screens, their pilots accepting losses that should have broken any rational formation. But these weren't rational soldiers fighting for pay or glory. These were people fighting for justice, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon the Veltai possessed. Lieutenant Choi Sunwoo piloted his fighter through a storm of defensive fire, his craft shield sparking as enemy beams scored hits on his hull. His wingman, barely 19 years old, had been vaporized just seconds earlier, but Sunwoo pressed his attack without hesitation. "Remember Minji," he whispered as he lined up his torpedo run on a Veltai command ship. The massive vessel tried to track his tiny fighter with its main guns, but he was too fast, too determined. His torpedo struck the bridge dead center, and the command ship's lights went dark. The humans fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and moral fury that shattered Veltai formations. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, each captain anticipating their allies' actions as if they shared a single mind. But more than their skill, it was their absolute determination that broke the enemy's will to fight. On every communication channel, human voices broadcast the names and stories of Veltai victims. While their weapons targeted military installations with surgical precision, their words struck at something deeper, the galaxy's memory. Koreth of the Mountain Clan, age 14, executed for refusing to reveal his clan's sacred caves, announced. Commander Kim Minseo, as her destroyer, disabled a Veltai weapons platform. Whisperwind of the Third Harmony, age unknown, killed for protecting ancient texts from destruction. The broadcasts continued as the battle raged. Every name, every story, every innocent life that the Veltai had taken to maintain their empire of terror. The galaxy was finally hearing the full accounting of 3,000 years of brutality. On Veltai Prime, Admiral Kesevar watched his forces crumble before an enemy that fought not for territory or resources, but for something his species had never understood: principle. His flagship's bridge shook as human torpedoes struck the shields, each impact bringing the humans closer to their target. "Sir, the defense platforms are falling faster than we can replace them," reported Thexmar, his aide's voice cracking with panic. "The humans are targeting our command and control systems specifically. They're not trying to destroy everything. They're trying to shut down our ability to coordinate resistance. How do we negotiate with beings who value justice over survival?" Kesevar asked, but his aide was already dead, killed by shrapnel from a direct hit on the bridge's outer hull. The question would haunt him in his final moments. The Veltai Empire had been built on a simple principle, that all beings valued their own lives above abstract concepts like justice or honor. They had conquered the galaxy by threatening what their enemies couldn't bear to lose, but humans seemed willing to lose everything for the sake of an idea. Across the galaxy, other species watched the battles unfold through intercepted communications and sensor readings. For 3,000 years they had lived under Veltai rule because they believed resistance was impossible. The Empire was too strong, too ruthless, too willing to make examples of those who defied them. But humanity was proving that tyranny could be resisted, that fear was not inevitable. On the gas mining platforms of the Tovan Republic, workers began sabotaging Veltai equipment. In the crystal cities of the Nexari Confederation, civilians started openly defying curfew orders. Even the peaceful Jelti, a species that had never known violence, began organizing protests against their Veltai overseers. The revolution was spreading faster than the Empire could contain it. Every human victory broadcast across the galaxy showed other species that the Veltai were not invincible, that their reign of terror could end. Commander Song Nari led the final assault on the Veltai Central Command Facility, a massive fortress built into the planet's largest mountain. Her strike team moved through corridors filled with emergency lighting, their boots echoing on metal floors as they fought their way toward the Empire's beating heart. Veltai defenders fell back before the human advance, their usual psychological warfare tactics useless against soldiers who had already accepted that some causes were worth dying for. Nari's team had taken heavy casualties. She had started with 50 Marines and now had only 12 left. But they pressed forward without hesitation. "Commander, we've reached the primary control room," reported Sergeant Kwon Jae-hyun, his armor scarred by energy weapon impacts. "The main computer core is just ahead." Nari looked at the massive blast doors that protected the Veltai Empire's central nervous system. Behind those doors were the computers that coordinated oppression across 47 star systems. the databases that contained the names of every species the Empire had broken, every world they had conquered through terror. "Blow the doors," she ordered. As the charges detonated and her team prepared to enter the control room, Nari spoke into her communicator, knowing her words would be broadcast across the galaxy alongside the names of the innocent dead. "You ruled through fear because you thought survival was all that mattered," she said, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's judgment. "You forgot that some things are worth dying for. Today, the galaxy remembers what courage looks like." The Veltai Empire was about to learn that there were forces in the universe more powerful than fear, and humanity was one of them. The collapse of the Veltai Empire happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 72 hours of the coordinated human assault, the alien government that had terrorized the galaxy for 3,000 years simply ceased to exist. But it wasn't military defeat alone that brought down their reign of terror. It was the complete destruction of their fundamental philosophy. Fear only worked when the target believed that submission might save them. The Veltai had built their entire empire on the assumption that all intelligent beings would choose survival over principle, that the threat of death could make anyone surrender their values. Humanity had proven that assumption catastrophically wrong. In the weeks following the final battle, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The crystalline Vorthkai were dismantling Veltai tribute collection centers on their homeworld, their song voices raised in harmonies of freedom that hadn't been heard for centuries. The warrior clans of Thexia were hunting down the last Veltai garrison commanders who had fled into the mountains, while their younglings learned traditional battle songs that the Empire had tried to erase. On the gas mining platforms of the Tovan Republic, workers were converting Veltai patrol ships into cargo haulers, transforming instruments of oppression into tools of prosperity. The peaceful Jelti had surprised everyone by organizing the most efficient refugee relief operations in galactic history, using their natural empathy to help former Veltai slaves adjust to freedom. But as alien species celebrated their liberation, across 17 star systems, humanity found itself facing an unexpected role. They had become the galaxy's reluctant guardians, protectors of those who could not protect themselves. The responsibility was overwhelming. Delegation after delegation arrived at human space stations and colonies, representatives from dozens of species asking for protection against local warlords, guidance in establishing new governments, help in rebuilding worlds devastated by Veltai exploitation. Some came with formal treaties, others with simple pleas for assistance. Admiral Li Jiwon found herself at the center of it all, coordinating humanity's response from her flagship, now stationed in what had once been Veltai Central Space. Her communications officer handled dozens of requests daily. The Nexari needed help establishing trade routes, the Tovan required military advisors to train their new defense forces, and recently liberated slave colonies were asking for everything, from medical supplies to educational materials. "Admiral, we have another request from the Outer Rim territories," reported Commander Oh Sungmin, looking exhausted after another 18-hour shift processing diplomatic communications. 3 systems are asking for human peacekeeping forces to help maintain order while they establish new governments. Jiwon rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of the galaxy's expectations settling on her shoulders. "How many ships can we spare?" "At current deployment levels, maybe 2 destroyer squadrons. But Admiral, we're already stretched across 15 different systems. Our people are exhausted, and we never intended to become a galactic police force." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from Terra Nova. President Kim. Hyejin's face appeared on the main screen, her expression mixing sorrow with determination. "Admiral, I need you to return to Terra Nova. We're establishing the memorial today, and there's something important we need to discuss about our future role in the galaxy." 6 hours later, Jiwon stood in what had once been an empty field outside. New Soul Colony. The memorial garden stretched across several acres, with pathways winding between carefully tended flower beds and small trees that would grow for centuries to come. At the center stood a wall of black stone, its surface covered with names carved in precise letters that caught the afternoon sunlight. Minji's name was there, along with thousands of others, every victim the Veltai had ever made an example. of every innocent life taken to feed their empire of fear. But this wasn't just a monument to the dead. It was a promise to the living that their sacrifice would never be forgotten. Jinho and Sumin stood before their daughter's name, their arms around each other as they read the inscription below. Minji, age 8, who chased butterflies and dreamed of seeing the stars. Their grief had transformed over the months, becoming something deeper and more purposeful than mere sorrow. "We've been working with representatives from every liberated world," Sumin explained to the gathering crowd. "The Galactic Protection Covenant isn't just a human initiative, it's a partnership between all free peoples, to ensure that what happened to our children never happens again." The Covenant was more than a military alliance. It was a commitment to education, to remembering history, to protecting the innocent regardless of their species or homeworld. Schools across the galaxy would teach children about the importance of standing up to tyranny. Memorial gardens like this one would be established on every world, ensuring that future generations remembered the cost of freedom. Jinho stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd of humans and aliens who had come to witness the ceremony. "My daughter died because evil beings thought they could break our spirits by targeting our most innocent. They were wrong. Her death didn't break us. It awakened us." Admiral Jiwon approached the memorial wall, her dress uniform bearing ribbons, from the campaign that had liberated the galaxy. She placed a small bouquet of earth roses at the base of Minji's inscription. "She would have been proud," Sumin said, watching the Admiral pay her respects. "She is proud," Jiwon replied, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who had seen impossible things become reality. Her sacrifice saved not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. Every child who grows up free, every parent who doesn't have to fear for their family's safety, every world that chooses its own destiny, they all owe their freedom to her courage, and to our refusal to let her death be meaningless. As the ceremony concluded, and the sun began to set over New Seoul, something beautiful happened. Children began emerging from the nearby colony buildings, human children, but also young aliens from a dozen different species whose families had come to live on Terra Nova. They ran into the fields where Minji had once played, chasing butterflies, and each other in games that transcended species barriers. They played freely because she had died, and because humanity had refused to let her death be meaningless. They laughed in languages from across the galaxy because people had chosen to fight rather than submit, to remember rather than forget, to stand together rather than kneel separately. Young Junho Park, visiting with his parents from New Busan, was teaching a group of Jelti children how to play an Earth game called Tag. A Tovan youngling was showing human kids how to identify different types of butterflies, using the natural electromagnetic sensitivity of her species. In the growing dusk, bioluminescent Nexari children created patterns of light that delighted everyone, their bodies glowing like living stars as they danced through the memorial garden. The Veltai had ruled by fear for 3 millennia, building an empire on the assumption that terror was the strongest force in the universe. It took the death of one human child to prove them wrong. Love was stronger than fear. Justice was more powerful than oppression, and the refusal to forget, the simple human act of carving names in stone and telling their stories, had proven mightier than any weapon the galaxy had ever known. As the first stars appeared in Terra Nova's darkening sky, parents called their children home for dinner. Human voices mixed with alien songs, creating a symphony of freedom that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The age of terror was over. The age of protection had begun. And in the memorial garden, Minji's name glowed softly. In the starlight, a permanent reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change the entire universe. The end.